Okay, formally, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music's free, virtual, and very informal monthly web series, Conversations with Our Curator. I am said curator, Melissa Ziobro, and I am also a professor of history at Monmouth University in beautiful West Long Branch, New Jersey. But this evening, I don't know if you can see behind me, you can tell I'm in a hotel room. I am joining you this evening from Cleveland, Mississippi, where I am at the Grammy Museum, Mississippi, helping to install our Music America exhibit. If you haven't heard about this beautiful, it's really just astounding exhibit yet, it gathers roughly 150 artifacts from our collection and institutions across the country to tell the story of 250 years of American music history in advance of America's semi-quincentennial. So that's very exciting for us. I was paranoid all day because I'm in Central Time here. I was paranoid all day that I was going to have the timing wrong, but here we are, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, 6 o'clock Central Time, and we're ready to get started. Tonight, we are with my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Ken Womack and Dr. Ken Campbell, to talk about their brand new book, Bruce Songs, the music of Bruce Springsteen, album by album, song by song. And you're in for a treat tonight because this book is not even out yet. It will be out September 23rd for the big day. We all know what the big day is, right? Bruce's 75th birthday. So you're getting a sneak preview here. If you are not familiar with Doctors Womack and Campbell, I would spend the entire hour introducing them to you and going over their impressive resumes, but suffice it to say they are beloved teachers on our campus, both prolific authors and all-around great guys. So we're in for a good session here. Before we dive in, though, forgive me, I always go through a few housekeeping details because we always have some people on the call who are not super familiar with the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music. So who are we? Again, Bruce Springsteen Archives, we are Bruce Springsteen's official repository, but we are also the Center for American Music. And that's very important too, right? That piece allows us to explore the diversity of American music in all its various artists and genres throughout American history with our collections, our programming, and exhibits. We are on the campus of Monmouth University in central New Jersey, as I noted, just a mile from the Jersey Shore, just up the road from famed Asbury Park. And we are in the process of building a brand new 30,000 square foot facility. So lots of very exciting things happening. I'd love for you to keep in touch. We are on all the social medias, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. And there's also our website, springsteenarchives.org. So please keep in touch. Don't miss anything. With that, though, thank you for your patience. Now we can dive into the book. Gentlemen, are you all set?
You bet.
Set.
Fabulous. So tell us to start, how long was this book in the works?
It's actually been several years, Melissa. And before we start, hey, congratulations to you on your first year with the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music. Ken and I just marvel at the great work you do, and congratulations on just your excellent contributions already.
That is so nice of you. Thank you. We are a small but mighty team. I should have mentioned that. We have our executive director, Bob Santelli, our director, Eileen Chapman. There's me, who just moved over from my role in the Department of History and Anthropology to be the curator, our programs manager, Jerry Houseworth, our operations manager, Adeline LeMay, and our part-time processing archivist. So thank you so much, Ken. We're really a small but mighty team, proud of all we're doing, with the collaboration, of course, of everyone across the Monmouth campus, like you and Dr. Campbell.
Well, and going back to the book, it's been several years that we've been working on this. In one sense, we began to compose it to have a text that would be complementary to the courses we offer regularly each year. on Mr. Springsteen. So that was one purpose. But if Ken doesn't mind, I mean, one of the reasons we do this kind of work is because we're Beatles writers, and in the world of Beatles scholarship, which now dates back some 50 plus years, a number of primary texts have been created to help further the study of the Fab Four, and we felt like we needed to make some contributions that would allow and enable more of that kind of study when it came to Bruce. And we patterned this book knowingly, and we make mention of it in our book after a book by William J. Dowdling called Beatles Songs. Ken?
Yes, I was so excited when Ken approached me about doing this project with him. I had been teaching a course on Bruce Springsteen and his connection to American history for a couple of years when he asked me about doing this. And I just thought that it made perfect sense to do it because there isn't really anything like it out there. And we were able to look at Bruce from a musical perspective, a literary perspective, a historical perspective, to include a lot of reference material in the book that is all collected in one place for people who want to dive into his work more seriously. And for me, it was just, I learned, I thought I knew a lot about Bruce and his music, but as I'm sure many of you know, when you sit down, first of all, when you teach a course, you learn a lot that you didn't think. But when you sit down when we sat down to do this, and it was just eye-opening how much I learned from writing about his songs and the context in which they were written, and listening to them and considering them all from angles that, frankly, I had never really done before. So it's been really, it has taken us several years to do it. It was a lot of work, but I hate to use the cliche, but if you, no work project ever fit, I think, a labor of love better as an expression than I think this did for Ken and me.
You both referenced the Springsteen courses that you teach at Monmouth. Could you just tell the audience, because I think we've probably got a lot of people in the audience saying, oh my gosh, I wish I could take that class. Can you just tell the audience what those classes are?
Well, they could take them, of course. There are all sorts of ways to audit courses at Monmouth, or to take them for credit, should you choose. So those sorts of things are possible. We owe Ken a big solid, as you may know, Melissa, because many years ago, when we were just building out this whole idea, Ken was the one who made sure we had a standing Bruce Springsteen course on the books. And so really was the pioneer in that regard. He mentioned before the sort of American historical approach he takes. Then we added one in the music department. I have a foot in both the music department and the English department. A different foot. And in this case, I sort of teach it in ways that approach our music students who are interested in that kind of interpretation. So I see these courses as being very complementary.
Yeah, absolutely. People could easily take both of our courses and I think benefit from them and get completely different things out of them. When Eileen Chapman told me that we were the only college or university in New Jersey that did not have a course on Bruce Springsteen, I said, well, somebody has to do that. And if nobody else is doing it, then I will do it. And I just couldn't be happier that I made that decision. And since I am a historian, as much as I love literature and I love music, I decided that I would play to my strength and make my course more a reflection of both Bruce's life and times, but also reflecting Bruce's very deep and profound, I would say, interest and knowledge and understanding of American history, so that we're able to look at other periods of American history that he has written about and treated in his songs and his music and his writing. So I think that students get a pretty good grounding in both his music and learn a lot more about this country that Bruce obviously cares so much about, as reflected in so many of his songs and albums.
I had to chuckle a little internally, Ken, when you said, well, okay, if we have to have a class on Bruce Springsteen, I'll do it, right? There are times when you take one for the team and it's truly a sacrifice, but that one sounded like it wasn't so much of a sacrifice,
No,
right?
one of the highlights, absolutely, of my life and career, I can say.
So I'm reading the press and the blurbs for this book, and it says that this is, quote, unlike any other resource. Unpack that for us a little bit, right? Because some of our listeners might think, oh, well, Bruce has a book called Songs in 1998, and there are a couple other books that kind of analyze song by song. Talk to us about how yours is really different.
Well, I can kick this off. I mean, one of the ways it's different is contemporaneousness, right? I mean, there are other books that attempt to discuss all of the songs and albums. Ours is the one, at least for the moment, that will be the most complete. We are right up to date with all of the releases, and we provide interpretation all the way through the most recent studio album. So, we certainly have that on our side, but we also, again, it's a unique kind of scholarship. Going back to what I said about the Beatles and the need for this sort of book, we had a student, one of your colleagues, Carly Migliarese, who worked with us on a grant from the Provost's office for a summer plus, really. And Carly used the archives and mined them very, very well to find some new tidbits to help beef up and provide value added on many of the stories. But then also you have Ken and I, with each chapter providing both a cultural and an historical introduction to each new album. And as Ken said, walking through Bruce's career is strolling through American history, right? I mean, I am, as Ken was alluding to, I'm the music sort of literary music interpreter of our team, but you can't teach a Bruce course and arrive at the river or even darkness and not begin to speak about stagflation or challenges that were taking place in the American economy, right? I mean, these become building block issues, and Ken and I elaborate on those with the expertise we have as professional critics.
Absolutely. I do think that one of the strengths that we bring is that as a co-authored book, we bring different areas of expertise that is just going to make, I think, our resource, kind of, I hope, deeper and richer. A lot of the works, Melissa, that you mentioned or that you might mention are done by journalists or done by music writers, and I think that Ken and I have sort of an academic perspective that takes his work a bit more seriously and really does more to place them within their historical context and Bruce's life and times. And also, while Bruce's book, Songs, is a very, very valuable resource, and I've used it in class myself, and it's very helpful to have his commentary, it's not always the case that authors, as my English professor Ken, my colleague, will tell you, I mean, authors are not always the most reliable guides necessarily, even to their own work, and they certainly, have their own perspective that isn't distanced or objective, perhaps, and so we felt a little bit more, I guess, free to dive in and provide our own takes on these songs, not to replace what Bruce says about them, but to supplement and complement what he says about them. And as Ken mentioned, his book goes up to The Rising, and ours goes up to Only the, and we do Only the Strong Survive. And I thought that was going to be a challenge, writing about an album of all covers. And actually, if you read what I say about that book, that album, it's really remarkable what he does with those songs and the selections and the order that he places them in. So I could talk about, but I do think that ours is, I don't think there's anything that is quite like what we've done.
Okay. So you mentioned that there were some uncovered sources from the archives. I'm curious if you had the opportunity to do any interviews for this book. I know Ken Womack, for example, did scores of interviews for his recent Mel Evans book, which was the subject of an earlier conversations with our curator. Any interviewing going on here, or was there already so much material for you to work with that you didn't have to do that?
Well, and that's one of the challenges of this book. And I don't know that I saw this coming necessarily, Ken, but was dealing with the folks at Rutgers. I mean, it came in, it's a pretty long book. Bruce has a long tale to tell, and for us to capture all of that material, or at least to do it justice, required a lot of pagination. So there was a certain point where we had to be very careful about adding in new material. In terms of the strictness of our word count. But what Carly enabled us to do was she would go in and study many of the notebooks that you guys have in the archives, or rare magazines. And so consequently, we have some new quotations from folks working in the E Street Band or on the production team about the songs and the making of them. Okay. And look, let's face it, this is important work for everybody to be doing right now. Because we are all mortal. And, I mentioned the case of the Beatles. By the time people started doing work on that band, folks had already been deceased. So, it's essential to capture that kind of first person history right now while we can. And some of it we know has already been lost with the loss of various folks who are integral to the story. So these are key times. All of this will be rewritten over and over for centuries. Let's not kid ourselves. But the primary work that's being done right now is the most important. So whenever we could glean something from the archives, we certainly did. But I didn't pick up the phone and do as many interviews. I would ask people about things, Mad Dog, Vinny Lopez, for example, on a couple of occasions. But for the most part, we were simply trying to get our arms around this very large existing corpus. You mentioned Bruce's songs book. We also have his voluminous autobiography, right? Where he's making plenty of new observations about these long-held songs, and we have to go and account for those, because a few of them, as Ken can tell you, would change how we think about the songs and the albums.
Right, and we had those resources. We had what he said in songs, and we had what he wrote in his autobiography, and we have so many interviews that he's done and people associated with him have done. And I should maybe let everybody know that in this book, what you're going to get is, for every single one of his 21 studio albums, you're going to get introductory essays by Ken and myself. You're going to get an analysis by us of every single song that he put on those 21 studio albums. You're going to get any reference information you want to know about who performed on those albums and where they were recorded and when they were recorded, and information such as that. But you're also going to get excerpts from contemporary reviews. You're going to get excerpts from what Bruce and his inner circle have said about their albums. So it did seem like this was a particular project that we didn't feel like we needed to do a lot of oral history to repeat what had already been done. At one point, I think we talked very briefly about, did we want to try to get permission to interview Bruce? And we decided that, number one, we didn't need to do that because he's already on the record as saying so much about his songs. And number two, we wanted to maintain a certain amount of distance and objectivity and really provide our own analysis. So there is information there from the sources. We relied on them, extremely valuable. But just to answer your question, Melissa, we didn't do a lot of oral history for this particular project ourselves.
Thank you.
I'm
I'm
sorry,
sorry.
there was always this belief that we're writing this for our students in our classes so that they have a place they can go, at least for the moment, right? That captures all of Bruce's albums, because as much as anyone else, given your teacherly role, that we're testing people on this material, right? We are using it as source material for the term papers they will write and the special projects they will do. So part of it is just trying to capture accurate information in a single place. And hopefully other scholars then will take this and build off of it, ideally.
Thank you. I always think it's so fascinating personally, and I hope the audience agrees, to kind of peek behind the curtain and look at the author's process. So that's really interesting. Thank you. So before I turn this over to audience questions, I want to just ask you about a few of the areas that I'm particularly interested in, selfishly. In all seriousness, of course, today is September 11th, and we have all been, in our own way, solemnly remembering those Americans who were killed in the terrorist attacks and in the wars that follow. In New Jersey, near our campus, we were particularly hard hit. It seemed almost everyone personally knew someone who was lost, and our New Jersey rescue personnel deployed to help with search and recovery efforts. And then there's that story, right, that I'm sure many on the call will remember, about someone driving past Bruce and yelling, "Bruce, we need you." And of course, what comes out of that is The Rising. So I wonder if each of you could maybe discuss the album broadly, or perhaps the song that you found most impactful. Ken Womack, you want to take it first?
Sure. This is one of those albums that changes deeply because we teach it regularly, right? Mm-hmm. Like many of you, I've thought about these albums for years, right? I've been thinking about Born to Run since I was not really running very often, decades upon decades ago. But The Rising is different. It's lived contemporary history. It's history that, today's students were born after 9/11, believe it or not. And so it's a key moment in every semester. And I find that, you mentioned that call that Bruce received, we need you. I find that he answered that call so spectacularly, particularly with the trilogy for me that ends the album. He finds such an exquisite balance between empathy for, the victims and their victimhood, whatever caused that evil so far across the earth to emerge. He shows empathy for trying to understand that. It's a very powerful sequence of songs in which he builds this opportunity for hope, right? And I thought a lot about that today, and just how what a perfect trio they are.
I think it's one of his best albums. I think it's one of his most important albums, and I think it's one of his most interesting albums. And one of the things that also really interests me about it is not just that he responded to 9/11, which obviously makes it such a valuable, even historical source. In fact, when I did about 10 years ago, I edited a selection of sources for a Western civilization in global perspective anthology. And got permission to include 3 of his songs from The Rising in that anthology. And so central and important a source, I think it is, for how people responded, how he responded to this this moment with an artistic expression that must have been so challenging. And Time Magazine identified it as the first attempt by a cultural artist to respond to, in a meaningful way, to 9/11. It's also really interesting because it comes at a particular point in Springsteen's career when his career seemed to be kind of on the downslide at that time, and he hadn't done a studio album since Ghost of Tom Joad in 1995. That's 6 years. That's pretty long in the music business. And he brought the E Street Band back for this album. And so I don't mean at all to minimize the response to 9/11, but there were so many things about this album that made it such an important, pivotal turning point in his career, and I would say in his life. In terms of songs, like I said, I mean, I can listen to that album and love every song. To answer your question, Melissa, I think the one that I think maybe epitomizes the album more than any other is Empty Sky, because he had this ability, and he does it elsewhere too, but he has this ability to take a historical event and tragedy and address it both at a larger perspective while still bringing it down to a personal level that anyone can relate to. And that's, I think, what he does on Empty Sky, that I think makes it kind of a symbol of the whole album, and of his response to 9/11.
Well, thank you. Now, of course, when we look at Bruce's catalog, 9/11 is by no means the first time that his songs meet the moment or address tough societal issues or advocate for some particular cause. Something that I've been exploring a lot is, Bruce and the Vietnam War, from the loss of his drummer in his early band, the Castiles, Bart Haynes, in Vietnam, to his song Lost in the Flood, to Born in the USA, to The Wall, right? We could go on and on. But I wonder if each of you could speak to one song, or if needed, a group of songs that addressed some particular issue that are especially helpful to you in your teaching.
Well, for me, it's Streets of Philadelphia. I mean, it just allows us to peel back certain facts about American history and culture, the belated response to the AIDS crisis. It's instructive, I think, for our students to think about the differences between now and then, the prejudices that still exist, but, the many miles that we've gone since those days. And I find it to be just one of Bruce's most powerful public statements. And I love The Rising, but, I remember vividly the experience of Streets of Philadelphia being released, and what a uniting kind of song that was for a lot of folks from different walks of life, and so very much needed during that time. That one still gets me, and frankly, it's just one of his most impassioned vocal performances. It's lacerating.
And the beat.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so many to choose from. Youngstown, American Skin, We Take Care of Our Own, Your Own Worst Enemy, Devils and Dust. I mean, you could go on and on and on. But Lost in the Flood. I mean, there's so many. But if I had to say that one that is maybe most central to the course and to teaching would probably be Born in the USA, because it's really it really speaks to his concern not only for Vietnam veterans, but for what's happening in the country in general. And it's just really, people know it, but they don't understand it. And I had a old friend who I knew many, many years in graduate school, who is a vet, who, when he saw that we were going to do this tonight, he messaged me with a story about, being denied assistance. And how when he heard Born in the USA, it was the first time that he felt like somebody had acknowledged his experience. And but it's a song that looks back, it's a song that looks forward, and it's a song that is also very much of its time. And that makes it a very, very useful teaching exercise to talk with students about that in class.
All right. Great answers. Now, we've talked a little bit about Bruce as a healer, Bruce as therapist, Bruce as chronicler, but Bruce also likes to make you dance, right? So before I turn it over to the audience, in your investigations here, talk to me about your #1 Bruce party song.
I don't know if I have maybe Ken does. I don't know if I have a #1 Bruce party song, but one of the attractions for me with this project was to be able to begin to account for everybody who played on the songs and the incredible musicians that Bruce had in those early days, the ones who recruited later, et cetera, et cetera. And so part of what I enjoyed about doing this was thinking about the performative aspects of these songs, right? And you can go on for miles thinking about the different guitar solos, many of the slickest lines that Bruce himself played, right? Not folks you might imagine from the E Street Band, or Clarence's intricate sax solos and the construction of those timeless, musical figures. So I had a lot of fun with that. I mean, if you want a party song, obviously, they're all over the place. We could easily pick a few. Certainly there's several on the second album, for example, that are mainstays, and I'm sure will be played this weekend in Asbury Park at See Here Now. What do you think, Ken? How do you approach that?
So I'd like to sort of make a not serious point and then a somewhat serious point. I remember being on a panel about Bruce's songs at Monmouth some years ago. Maybe some of you were there, and a question that kind of took me by surprise, and the question was along the lines of what Melissa just asked: is well, what's your guilty pleasure? In Springsteen's music. And I think my answer would be the same as it was then, which is No Surrender, which to me is just like such a fun song. And I guess I feel guilty about it because, you learn more from a 3-minute record than you did in school, and I'm a professor. But I just think that's a wonderful, rocking, fun, sing at the top of your lungs, kind of song. This kind of serious point that I make is that what I discovered from doing this book with Ken and writing about these songs and analyzing them in depth is how many serious messages are kind of hidden or buried in his so-called rocking, fun songs. And I just give, for one example, like Out in the Street is like, to me, another really, really, good rocking, party kind of song. When I'm at it, but even in the midst of that, it's like, when I'm out on the street, I don't feel sad or blue, which implies that he feels sad and blue the rest of the time. And yes, many of you know, maybe all of you know, like, depression is and mental health is something that is a major theme in his life and in his music. So I, like I said, I learned a lot from doing the book. It doesn't take away from my enjoyment of the songs. If anything, I think it enhances it because I think that some of them are so much richer than you even realize, just kind of, hearing and having them in the background or just like, partying out to them or something like that.
Yeah, like Rosalita, right? I mean, it's clearly a fun song that has everybody dancing in the aisles, but the implications are about exclusion and how did they get to that place, right? That the song is even being created. That's one of the beauties of his whole aesthetic, is that he has us thinking about those. Even an incident on the second album, right? You can leave, but don't leave me. Yeah, that just gives me a chill every time I hear it, in the midst of gang warfare and all of those stories. It's just staggering the kind of dramatic worlds he builds.
Mm. Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much for entertaining my questions. I know I can't wait to dive into the book. Let's open it up to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question. Or if you would like to, you can type it in the chat and I will read it for you. So I see Arlen on the screen. Are you raring to go with a question?
Of course. I love these guys and I can't wait to read their book. My question is, where do you think Bruce's career would have gone if it wasn't for John Landau, in a sense, usurping Mike Appel? Where would Bruce's career have gone if Mike Appel had stayed as manager? And what do you think Landau's influence has been as his producer, mentor, kind of still enigmatic role in Bruce's career? Because just to interject my take is that I think Landau had a tremendous influence on Bruce's content, his lyrics, the blue-collar troubadour of the working class aspect that he became, in a sense, most famous for. I hope that didn't cloud my question.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, I think I'm in agreement with you that obviously John Landau, who's one of the great privileges of working with Melissa and the folks at the archives, has been getting to know John. And my gosh, he is, you can tell the gravitas that he brought to the story and the significance of having John and his team involved. I don't know that we're talking about Bruce Springsteen in the same way, if we're talking about him at all. It was such a much needed and powerful change in that moment in his career. And Bruce, of course, as he writes eloquently in his autobiography, he came face to face with what the limitations were going to be with Mike Appel. And they were unbridgeable in terms of moving forward. As we know, I mean, the work that Bruce had to do just to be able to make the Born to Run album, right? That was no guarantee.
Right.
Columbia had mostly had enough. He was saved by an internal memo and all sorts of other miraculous moments. But I mean, it's it as you suggested and the way you so eloquently set it up, Arlen. I mean, it's the game changer. And of course, one thing we know is John dared him to be more ambitious. And when I look at John Landau's own life, he was doing the same thing with himself, right?
Right. Absolutely.
He was daring himself, producing Jackson Browne's The Pretender is such a great
MC5.
Yeah, MC5. He could have continued to be Rolling Stone writer extraordinaire, but he really wanted to have an ambitious, impactful role in popular music and rock music in general. And gosh, I mean, is there a better vehicle than Bruce at that moment, at that time. So I do think, I do doubt we're talking about him if we don't have that moment, you know, because Bruce has a handful of albums, 2 albums, or at that point, and no guarantee that there would have been any more. Does he become a relic of the shore like so many other folks? Landau gave him that ability to have the long career he does.
Well,
Yeah, well, thanks, Arlen, and I agree with you too about Landau's impact. I think that the best thing that any mentor can do for someone is to bring out the best in them and suggest ways that they might improve, while at the same time not really trying to change them, but letting them be themselves. And that's what I see. That's how I see the relationship between Landau and Springsteen. And in some ways, even though it was a very, very difficult thing, obviously, for him to go through, in some ways, I think his difficulties with Mike Appel worked to Bruce's benefit, because it kind of forced him in a way to grow up, become more serious, and gave him things to write about, that he channeled those difficulties into a very, very creative way, instead of allowing himself to be destroyed by them. So I at the same time that Landau, that period, Born to Run to Darkness, really, really important formative period for him, I think.
Absolutely.
Sure. And then afterward, right? He gave Bruce the confidence to put Nebraska out in such a raw and unvarnished form, or, almost completely counter to that, right? The next album, you need to have another hit, right? And so he cajoles him into writing Dancing in the Dark. I mean, these are brilliant moves that require Bruce to trust him.
Can I just follow up? My feeling is, under Mike Appel, Appel thought of Bruce as the great rock and roller. Under Mike Appel, you pretty much have the content of the first 3 albums, which are still 3 of Bruce's greatest. And then, I'm not saying what would Bruce's career have been had Mike Appel, meaning theoretically, had there not been a lawsuit. Under John Landau, and this gets back into my bailiwick, you have a wealth of incredible outtakes. Under under John Landau, you've got all these incredible outtakes. Fire, Because the Night. Maybe under Mike Appel, who believed in Bruce as the great rock and roller, the music, the performance. He wanted Bruce to perform the national anthem in 1973. The vision he had for him, we'll never know. And that's what I'm saying is, it's interesting that under Landau, we've got the incredible lyrics, the blue-collar troubadour of the working class. But under Appel, we had Bruce, the incredible rock and roller. Not that he didn't become that too.
Right. Yeah, and you bring up, will we ever know? Well, I mean, Mike, Mike. He'll be glad to tell you.
Touche.
Okay, I've got a question here in the chat, and it asks you gentlemen if there's a song that you have an entirely new take on after writing this book.
It's hard to think of just one. I think that I don't know. I think
maybe the answer is just no. That's okay.
No. I think that there are a lot of songs that I have a different take on. And I think that it really has to do with listening to these songs in the context of the albums, in the order in which they were meant to be listened to. And so I find that even when he puts songs that seem to be completely unrelated or dissimilar, that when you listen carefully, you notice themes that continue to get developed. So, I mean, I do think that I have a different view of, I don't know, maybe, man's job, or, I don't know. I mean, there's that when you, especially like doing this book, because you're not like just listening to one album, you're listening to all of the albums, and so each song now appears to have some connection with other songs. So it's really hard to pick one song that I said, wow, I never realized that this about this particular song. It's just that I think I have a sort of a different insight into his work as a whole. I'll try to think if there's one other that maybe comes to mind, but Ken, how would you answer that?
I think for me, it's really, it's Western Stars, the album, which you and I both love. And you were very gracious to let me take the lead on some of those songs. And, this is when you write a book, of course, you become close, as Ken just said, to everything, right? You become predisposed to everything, but spending such concentrated time with those songs allowed me to really get involved with them and understand the wonderful progress from the beginning, right? With Hitchhiking all the way through those beautiful 70s vistas, and then the heartbreak and beauty of the last song, right? Bills and kids and kids and bills. And it's just, what a journey. And so I think I felt closer to that album by writing this book with you.
Okay, here's a question in the chat from our valued colleague, Matt O'Brien. Thanks for joining us, Matt. Bruce's music resounds across generations, much like Bob Dylan's has done. Born to Run speaks to a Vietnam-era generation, yet we can see the same themes echo in The Rising. Is there a contemporary musician who does the same with his or her songs?
Please tell me you're going to say Taylor Swift.
Well, you know what? That's a legitimate answer. I mean,
why I threw it out there.
Yeah. Well, maybe you're just bailing us out, Arlen. But I mean, it's such a good example of a person who
pundits have compared them.
Yeah, who thinks a lot about relationships and the challenges that young people experience. I mean, this is nothing new in the world of popular music,
right?
Right. But she's built an exciting body of work, without a doubt. Gosh, Ken, I know you want to take this.
No, I don't know. I mean, I have great admiration for Taylor Swift. I think she is an amazing artist and songwriter, and I think her songs are thoughtful and well crafted and catchy, and yeah, she's very prolific.
I was listening to her new album today. Do you know the Tortured Poets Department, Ken? And
yeah.
I have to say, I was profoundly moved by the way she tries to connect with the legions of young women who are the clear audience for so many of these songs. It's really quite moving. Clara Bow. I mean, my God, if you listen to one song tonight that you want to try for the first time, give that one a go. The way she takes it to herself and lets her audience know that she understands every bit of their experience, that they're not alone in the world. It's just a really powerful tale.
Yeah, and she's probably the only one who, I mean, music has developed where there are just so many niche followings, and so there's some interesting country artists and some interesting folk artists, and there's still some really good singer-songwriters out there, but I don't know that there's anyone who is like consistently reaching the audience or addressing things on a kind of a level that is going to resonate with everybody. Probably nobody more than Taylor Swift probably does that as much as anybody does.
That was great, Melissa.
That's my tagline.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Another question from the chat regarding the album Only the Strong Survive. Did you come across any interesting stories on how Bruce chose the songs that appear on that album?
Well, I had the pleasure, Ken gave me the pleasure of doing the songs analyses for Only the Strong Survive. And I didn't come across any stories of how Bruce chose the songs, but I think that I know why he chose the songs, because if you and I talk about this in the book, that if you listen to that album from beginning to end, there is a narrative arc to the album, and it is both a tribute to Motown and the great soul artists, and some not that well known. I mean, he chose a few songs that were, that some people would consider to be fairly obscure, but the songs themselves, I think, tell a story that Bruce wants to tell about the beginnings of kind of adolescent love, to heartbreak, to despair, to nostalgia. I'm sorry it ended, but at least I've got the memories, kind of thing. To hope, because the album ends with "Someday we'll be together," and
I'll see you in my dreams.
And which tailors exactly with what he does on "Letter to You,"
right?
And which deals with death and mortality and the finiteness of life and the importance of appreciating the people and the opportunities that we have while we still can, and yet retaining a hope that this isn't the end. And I think that the way in which Bruce can take you to the kind of depths, but then raise you to the heights, is Ken, as a literature professor, it's like most authors try to do one or the other, and they might do it. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Ken, or not, but and they might do it really, really well. But it's like Bruce does both really, really well.
But you don't think there's an element of plastic soul, rubber soul to that album, musically, production wise? No E Street Band, all just, one guy. Most of the arrangements, I think, were wrote. I mean, you're telling the lyrical story of the album, and that's beautiful. But I just thought it was really a little too plastic, even for Bruce.
Well, I covered Plastic Soul naturally Monday night in my opening night of my Beatles course, right? It has to come up, right? And of course, the man who came up with the phrase was Paul McCartney.
Right.
Part of it was a dig at the Rolling Stones, but part of it was also a dig at he and his mates trying to sing songs like rock and roll music and turning them into these kind of machine-like tunes. Wonderful machine-like tunes, but
white boys singing black music. Absolutely.
Right. I mean, that's part of what we do that I think makes teaching so exciting, is you can reflect these exact conversations we're having right now and teach the conflicts, right?
Exactly.
Talk about, what does it mean? Where, this vaunted 20th, 21st century musician is, calling up a number of Motown hits, et cetera. What are the implications? Because there are implications, just as there are with the Rolling Stones going down to Muscle Shoals or Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, but when Bruce used to do cover versions back in the day, so to speak, with the E Street Band, he reinvented the songs. He made them truly his own. They weren't rote followings of the original arrangement. That's what disappointed me the most.
Well, I see, and I can understand that, Arlen, and respect that. So the way that I would interpret that is that this is an homage This
Right.
is a tribute to those artists. And so he's not trying to reinvent them.
But isn't a great cover version a tribute? Isn't Bruce's I Want You a tribute to Dylan's?
Sure. Absolutely.
It's the greatest tribute you can make, to reinvent the song and make it your own.
See, I'm not, they might,
Whitney Houston.
they might, I don't know.
I'm gonna have to weigh in as the moderator.
To me, his vocals, on vocal performances on those songs
That was the best thing about it.
make the album.
Okay,
You know,
well,
to me that was him making them his own. The songs might sound, you might say the songs might sound the same to you, the same arrangements or whatever, but there's no doubt that Bruce is singing them, and he's singing them in his own vocal style. So like when he does Night Shift, I don't hear the Commodores. I hear Bruce Springsteen doing something different.
why are we still talking about Joni Mitchell's Both Sides Now and Judy Collins? Because great cover versions have a beauty and an honor all of their own. And like I said, of course, Bruce's vocal, just like his lyrics, are always great. I'm just criticizing the music itself, the arrangements. If you're telling me an album of those songs recorded with the E Street Band with more inventive arrangements that would have been more like what he used to do with songs like Spanish Harlem and Dylan's I Want You. I mean, those are what I call cover versions. Only the songs survive. Again, lyrically, the placement of the songs, I get that. Bruce's vocal, always great. But that's
a way for us to put a sort of a bow on this. And no, this comes up a lot in Beatles studies, right?
Of course.
Particularly with Mr. McCartney, who has the benefit, and it's sometimes at some junctures the disadvantage of living into old age.
Yeah.
And you know, we're very fortunate with Mr. Springsteen that we still have him,
Yeah.
that he's still active. And I think what we got with that record that maybe allows all of us to understand how we feel about it is that this is the record he would make now, right? You know, I think that it's the kind of record that a person makes who has a long career, and this is maybe one of those frontiers he wanted to study and experience, just as he wanted that sort of string approach to the Western Stars record. You know, this is we can look at Mr. McCartney's career, right, Ken? And my God, it's littered with experiments and different kinds of approaches. You know,
Like Neil Young.
Yeah, sure. And I think in this case, this is Bruce having a long career, and it will be interesting to see what he does next.
Right.
When we get a next album, which I imagine we will, right?
Didn't he promise?
Right. And I'm not trying to, to convince you otherwise than what you're saying, Arlen, but
No, neither am I.
the last thing that I'll say about it is I also think there is a connection between this album and Letter to You.
Absolutely.
In which Bruce finds himself at a point, and I'm I'm there too, where he's looking back more than he's looking forward. And I think that maybe he wanted to do those songs because they were so important to him in his youth, and that he wanted to do them at this point in his career as he remembered them, as opposed to earlier in the career when he would have been more experimental and wanted to put his own spin on things. That I don't know if I'm right or not, but that's kind of the way
I'm saying is, I thought the arrangements were phoned in.
Okay. All right. We're going to move on from that one because we are just about out of time. Doctors Womack and Campbell, do you have a moment for one more question?
You bet.
Sure.
This is from the chat, and I feel like maybe it's a nice one to conclude on with your thoughts here. In the chat, Miriam writes, sometimes I meet people who say they just don't like Bruce. He has no talent. What would you say to those individuals?
Well,
Larry Adams.
so much of music is deeply contextual. When you hear a song, under what conditions, the nature of the experience, which is why, we can miss entire we can miss entire musical eras and then rediscover an artist or a band later and find them on our own good time. I would invite them to give him another listen and experience, it's such a trite thing to say, but the experience of Born to Run, right? The song, the journey of that bridge alone is one of the great musical creations of our time. That crazy old rock and roll guitar solo that Bruce breaks off, Clarence just blowing the horn with all his might, and then those lyrics about the boulevard and the girls and the rear view mirrors and the boys trying to look so hard, the cruising, right? All of it exploding into a mist, right? It's I would invite them to listen to that drama and the drama of that storytelling and give him another listen. I mean, some of these songs, not all of them, right? We know this, but I mean, to me, that's like Eleanor Rigby or A Day in the Life. I mean, Born to Run exists outside of time. It is contextual vis-a-vis time, but it exists outside of time with the magic of that drama and the musicianship. I mean, Ken?
I have a hard time understanding it, but it's I have some of my closest friends saying, how can you like Bruce Springsteen? I mean, I hate Bruce Springsteen. That sentiment is definitely out there, and yet to me, his greatness is so obvious that it really is hard for me to understand. And the only thing that I can say is that I'm sure there are plenty of people who you would find who say, probably many more than say they don't like Bruce Springsteen, who might say, oh, I don't like Shakespeare, or, it's like, so the fact that you don't like something, to me, indicates that for some reason you don't understand it, that you don't, I don't know, that you don't get it. You're not.
Well, they haven't been properly exposed to it.
I don't know. And I mean, and I think it's maybe because if people aren't already Springsteen fans, he didn't really become popular from being played on AM radio. He didn't have a top 10 hit until Hungry Heart in 1980. He has never had a #1 song on the pop charts. Which is also mind-blowing for an artist of his stature.
Born to Run only reached 18.
But right. But so if you hear, so if you're listening to the radio and all you hear is and students come into my class and they say, oh yeah, I know Born in the USA, or they might know one or two of his songs. And if that's all you hear, if that's all you have to go on, it might not stand out from, among the crowd. But I think that this is what our book hopefully will do for people, is it's the totality of his work. Yes. And his work ethic and his creativity that is unsurpassed. Bob Dylan, would probably be the only one that I would even compare him to in terms of the quality and quantity of his work. And I actually think that Bruce, and I'm a big Bob Dylan fan too, but I think that, and Bob probably even has Bruce beat in terms of quantity, but I think that for consistent quality, I don't think there's anyone that compares to Bruce Springsteen.
Well, I think that is a perfect place to end. Drs. Womack and Campbell, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you so much. Did either of you want to say any closing words before we conclude?
Oh, just how, what a privilege it is that you've made time for us, Melissa. We appreciate it. We'll be doing a book signing soon at Thunder Road Books, very appropriately, right, Ken?
Yes.
And, we hope to see the local folks out there if they get a chance. But what an honor it has been to share time with you and your great audience. Thank you so much.
And thank you all for making time out of your evening and schedule to be with us and to listen to us and let us talk about something that we love. And thank you, Melissa, for hosting this. And Ken, I'm forever in your debt. It's such a great joy working with you. And I'm very proud of what we've done together.
Back at you, pal.
Fabulous. Well, everybody, again, it's Bruce Songs, the music of Bruce Springsteen, album by album, song by song, and it will be out on September 23rd. Make sure you get a copy. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, keep in touch with the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music on our social media and on our website, springsteenarchives.org. Have a great night, everybody, and keep your fingers crossed that the hurricane does not impede my journey home to New Jersey. Thank you.
We need that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Trent,
everyone.
Melissa, thank you guys so much.
Nice
Take
meeting
care.
you, Tim.